Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmeri, inviting you to the series of conferences with global experts on the US-China relationship. Perhaps the most consequential issue of our time. This program is brought to you by the Foreign Policy Association. I'm your host, Sarwar Kashmeri, and it gives me great pleasure to invite as my guest today Professor Kishore Mahbubani. So let me introduce Professor Mahbubani. He has dedicated decades of his life to public service, 33 years in the Singapore Administrative Service, 13 years as the founding dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and continuing now as a distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute. He has done 2 stints as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations, held various diplomatic positions, including at the apex of Singapore's Foreign Service as the Foreign Secretary. He was appointed the founding dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. He is an illustrious academician. He's a prolific writer. He has written 8 books, and I must tell you that his books are provocative, thought-provoking, and also have provocative titles. His last book was Has China Won? The book before that was Has the West Lost It? He, of course, has received global recognition for his intellectual achievements and his academic contribution. But for me, I take great pride in saying that in his bio, he says that perhaps the best summary of his contributions was made in the citation for the U.S. Foreign Policy Association's medal, which he received in 2004. And in presenting the medal, the Foreign Policy Association described him, and I quote, a gifted diplomat, a student of history and philosophy, a provocative writer, and an intuitive thinker. And of course, this program is in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association. So with that, let me invite Dr. Kishore Mahbubani to the program. Hello there, Dr. Mahbubani. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much for inviting me to your show.
It's a pleasure and an honor, and I want to ask you if you have 12 inches of snow in Singapore, as I do in Hanover, New Hampshire.
Well, Singapore has got a problem. It's got 12 months of summer. You wouldn't mind 1 month of winter to complement 11 months of summer.
Well, you know, that reminds me of this lady who lives up in Maine. She's a writer, and she says Maine has two seasons. It has winter and it has August. So Singapore. Well, listen, Kishore, let me start by asking you that yesterday China asked the Biden administration to get rid of these sanctions, stop meddling in the internal affairs in China. Here in Washington, I pick up, and I'm sure you do, a distinct anti-China flavor in the establishment. What's happening here, Kishore?
Well, thank you, Sarwar. As you know, I wrote the book Has China Won? To talk
Indeed.
about China relations in an effort to understand the structural forces that are driving this contest. So even though President Trump has gone, President Biden has come, the structural forces driving this contest are still alive. Number one, and this is something that Graham Allison has spoken about, whenever the number one emerging power is about to overtake the number one power, which today number one emerging power is China, is about to overtake the United States. The United States will push down China.
Right.
So it's by a deep historical force that's been there for 2,000 years or more. But number two, there's also been a fear of the yellow peril in the Western imagination, which is also driving this structural contest. And number three, there was a kind of a bipartisan consensus in the United States that as the United States engaged China, China would open up economically, and after China opened up economically, China would open up politically and become a liberal democracy, and then China and America could live happily with each other. Of course, that hasn't happened either. So you can see these are the structural forces driving this contest. But at the same time, the biggest mistake that the United States has made, and this mistake I can describe with great conviction because this was told to me by Henry Kissinger, I think America's greatest living strategic thinker. And at a one-on-one lunch he had with me in March 2018 in New York, he said that the problem is that the United States has launched this contest without a strategy. And to put it very simply, they're not even clearly specified goals. What does the United States want from China? Right?
Well,
Does the United States want China to give up the Communist Party immediately? I mean, is that going to be your goal? Is that realistic? Can you achieve it? So there's no clear understanding of what are the goals the United States wants from China. And so instead, what you have is strategic groupthink in the United States, and you have an attitude towards China, but not a strategy towards China.
But so let me push back on that just a little bit and say that couldn't the same question be asked from America to China? What is China's strategy? Do they want to become the world's hegemon? Do they want to become the world's greatest military power? Are they doing things like the Belt and Road Initiative to commercially colonize? How would you answer that?
Those are excellent questions. Number one, the Chinese have watched how the United States has spent $5 trillion fighting unnecessary wars since 9/11 at a time when the standard of living of the bottom 50% of the United States of America has gone down over a 30-year period. So the Chinese view is, if the United States, you want to be the global military hegemon, go right ahead. We have no interest in competing with you in that sphere. And the Chinese defense budget is still so much smaller than the US defense budget, and as a percentage of GNP is smaller than that of the United States. And China, by the way, does not have a kind of universalizing, civilizing mission of the kind that the United States has. The United States believes that its mission is to transform the world. China believes that its mission is to transform China and make China once again a great civilization. And China is happy to live with other great civilizations. So if the West is thriving, India is thriving, Europe is thriving, the China is quite happy with that.
So would you say
China strong, safe, and secure?
So sorry to interrupt, but are you saying then that China's basic strategy is to focus on getting itself and its people up the quality of life trajectory, that it wants to be safe, it wants to get rich? Is that the strategy you think that China is following?
Well, to understand China's strategy, you must understand China's history, which is why, in addition to the book I wrote, US-China 1, I have a MOOC course on US-China relations. You can just get it on edX Kishore Mahbubani.
Right.
And, if you don't understand the century of humiliation that China suffered from 1842 to 1945, then
Correct.
You don't understand China's strategy. Because China's main goal, and this is the goal of its strategy, is to avoid another century of humiliation. And you all know the Opium War in 1842, when the Chinese refused to accept British opium in return for Chinese tea, and the British thought that was very unreasonable. They bombarded Chinese ports, seized Hong Kong, seized Guangdong territory, and forced the Chinese to smoke opium, right?
Right.
Now, can you imagine, is that a civilized thing to do by anybody? And the Chinese commissioner in Guangdong wrote a letter to the Grand Queen and said, UK, you have banned opium. If you ban opium in UK, why are you selling opium to us?
But Kishore, let me interrupt though, but that, don't you, how long can one carry that memory? In 2021, is it still fair to premise one's behavior on that? That was awful. It was horrible. So that's a question to you. But what do you think?
Well, I mean, the Chinese see daily acts of humiliation against them. The United States does not treat China with respect. The
Hmm.
United States insults China.
Hmm.
And all you have to do is to read the two speeches that Vice President Pence gave in 2018, 2019. And if you read what Mike Pompeo has been saying about China, if you read those speeches, the
Right.
tone of condescension, right? It's quite stunning, you know. And you know, I was a diplomat, as you mentioned, for 33 years, right? You know,
Yes.
you know the worst way to conduct diplomacy is to insult another country. And
Absolutely.
especially in Asia, where face matters so much. And so when you have very senior American officials insulting China with great abandon, thinking that they have a moral right to do so, and let me ask you a simple question. Name me one Asian country, one, that follows the United States in insulting China.
Good point. Good point. But Kishore, just 2 days ago, President Biden made his speech at the Munich Security Conference and at the G7, and he looked the camera right in the and he said, "America is back," meaning forget what has happened in the last few years. America's back, and we are heading back on the part of multilateralism and so on. How was that received in Asia? And isn't that, in a sense, an antidote to what you have just said, Kishore? I want to know those two things: what you think, and also how was that received, and in that part of the world.
Well, I would say the world was overjoyed when Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump.
Right.
Donald Trump was a very dangerous, disruptive figure on the global stage. And the whole world breathed a huge sigh of relief when Joe Biden was elected. And Joe Biden, as you know, is a very nice person and indeed just the kind of nice grandfatherly figure you need to heal in
Right.
America that has
Right.
been so badly divided. So Joe Biden is a gift to America and a gift to the world. But at the same time, while we all want the Biden administration to succeed, the Biden administration is making a huge strategic mistake in its policies towards China because, as I mentioned earlier, the Trump administration has started a geopolitical contest against China without a strategy. And if the Biden administration continues these negative policies on China without a strategy, it is actually not damaging China. It is going to damage the United States of America because at the end of the day, we want America to come back, but the best way for America to come back is to overcome what the Nobel laureate Angus Deaton has described as a sea of despair among the white working classes in America. Now, America is the only major developed country where the average income of the bottom 50% has gone down over a 30-year period, while you spend $5 trillion fighting unnecessary wars. So the first thing for America to do is number one, to stop fighting unnecessary wars, cut down its defense budget, spend the money on its people, make the American people happy again. Because the best way to win the competition with China is not by through any kind of military expenditures, because the outcome of the contest between US and China will not be in the military sphere, but it will be in the quality of their societies. And you know, George Kennan, the man who formulated the strategy of containment against the Soviet Union, said way back, he said, at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest is not going to be decided by bullets and bombs and aircraft carriers
Right.
or jet fighters. It will depend on the spiritual vitality of each society. And
Right.
American society in the 60s, 70s, 80s was spiritually much more vibrant than the Soviet Union. Today, I mean, the reality is, as I document in my book, The American society is a hugely depressed society. Life expectancy is coming down. Infant mortality is going up. Suicides are going up. Opioid addiction is going up. And by contrast, as I quote a Stanford University psychologist Jean Fan is saying, there's a kind of a tremendous vibrancy in Chinese society that Americans are not aware of, because the Chinese have just enjoyed the best 40 years of human development in 4,000 years of Chinese history.
Fine,
So
that's
the best 40 years, don't you think they'd be happy?
I hear exactly what you're saying, which leads me to a question that I was saving, but I think this might be the appropriate time. Do you think you've mentioned that perhaps, not perhaps, but that when the West opened up, China was brought into the WTO and so on, people thought that China would become, if I may use the word, like us, and of course that did not happen. Uh, do you think sometimes that we in the U.S. Behave towards China as we expect China to be, not reality as China is now? And you've described very appropriately, the standard of living, the 800 million people that were raised from poverty to lower middle class and so on. Do you think sometimes that we craft our policy with the assumption of what we'd like China to be, not what it is now?
Absolutely. Sometimes if you want to try and understand our times, it's best to take the perspective of a future historian looking back at our times. And when a future historian looks back at our times, he or she will be absolutely shocked that a country like the United States, which is less than 250 years old, with 1/4 the population of China, the United States of America thought this young republic, when it deals with a 4,000-year-old civilization with 4 times the population of United States, that America would transform China rather than China transform America. Now, that's a hugely arrogant assumption. I mean, it's arrogance of the highest order, and it reflects a complete lack of realism and understanding of the rest of the world. If I'm not mistaken, your founding fathers said that America must always show a decent respect for the opinions of mankind.
Right.
To show a decent respect for the opinions of mankind, you must first understand mankind. That's an old-fashioned term, understand humanity. And China, to put it very simply, China will remain Chinese. Chinese civilization is not going to be transformed by the United States of America. And so the United States of America has got to understand that the past 200 years of Western domination of world history and the past 100 years of the American century, these were aberrations in a much longer historical time frame. Because from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies were always those of China and India. So the 21st century is not going to be like the 20th century, not going to be like the 19th century. It'll be like the first 1800 years after the birth of Christ. So therefore, Americans psychologically have to deal now with a multipolar, multi-civilizational world, and it can be a happy world for Americans, because a more prosperous world will be one that also raise the living standards of Americans also. So the Americans need to make a major U-turn away from the arrogant assumptions of the 20th century.
So let me ask you this, Kishore. America prides itself on a lot of its human behavior aspects, and that there is this issue, if I may say so, of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang that has come on the American horizon. There is the issue of Xi Jinping, who is now the president for life. And I'm trying to ask you, how does American policy square this circle? On the one side, we insist on human rights and we point to issues there, but then, the establishment in Washington is saying, well, look, Xi Jinping is there for life and he's running roughshod over human rights. How does America's its strategy square this circle? How do we do it?
Well, I'm actually very glad that the United States is a strong believer and supporter of human rights, because I want to live in a world where there's greater respect for human rights. And I was ambassador to the UN twice. I know what a beautiful document the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is, and I'm glad there's no more slavery. And in fact, until recently, there was no more torture by any major developed country until the United States reintroduced it in Guantanamo. And when you ask me how can the United States promote human rights, I think Joe Biden had a wonderful line. He said we can best promote human rights by the power of example. And therefore, if the United States says to other countries, don't torture people, the United States should stop torturing people. The United States should shut down Guantanamo, right? As you know, if you are a preacher in a church and you tell your congregation, be faithful to your wives, and then you know the preacher cheats on his wife, do you respect the preacher? You don't. So
Good
I
point.
think that the United States showed its the power of human rights by the power of example. And I can tell you, the killing of George Floyd was seen the world over, right? Was seen in the
Right.
world over. And you know something? There's an American philosopher called John Rawls. He's the greatest philosopher that America has had in the last 100 years. He said that if you want to choose which society to be born in, you must choose on the basis that you're completely blind. You don't know which society you're going to, what level you're going to be born in, and the bottom 10% of the society, which one you want to be born in. And I mean, ask you a simple question. Today, if you were to make a choice, do you want to be born in the bottom 10% of the United States of America or in the bottom 10% of China? And just look, and you want to answer the question, look at the statistical data. Your chances of being incarcerated if you are in the bottom 10% of the United States of America are above 50%. Your chances of dying in violence are incredible. Your chances of dying early are very high. So what is the power of example that you are showing down there?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So and you know when you point to and clearly there are problems in Xinjiang. Clearly, right?
Yes.
Xinjiang has got a lot of Muslims. There are 1.4 billion Muslims in the world. Not one Muslim country supports the United States on what it's doing in Xinjiang. So I think Americans should engage in some reflection. What does that mean? And on President Xi Jinping, I would say, at the end of the day, keeping a country like China together every day, a country of 1.4 billion people, a country that has experienced over 130 to 40 years of constant turmoil, right up to the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1975. Now, if the Chinese have experienced the best, as I said, the best 40 years in the past 4,000 years, the Chinese have obviously worked out a political system that doesn't work for the United States of America, doesn't work for Europe, doesn't work for India, but it works for China.
So,
And a Harvard Kennedy School study has just come out that said that support for the Chinese Communist Party has gone up from 83% to 95% in China. This is the Harvard Kennedy School.
Let me
So
interrupt.
I say let the Chinese people decide what kind of government they want to have.
So, what I would like to do, you've illuminated your answer very well. What I want to do in the time we have left is take a more positive stance and see if you can help me think about 2 or 3 large projects that no one else but America and China can accomplish together to see if we might be able to begin a thought, do something positive. I mean, so what do you think? And, what are two of the pandemic comes to mind? One of the things that I've been thinking about, the America had the Strategic Air Command, that the Soviet Union, how about a strategic pandemic command that China and America can work together on? What are some of your thoughts on 2 or 3 projects that both countries, who are the two superpowers, can work together on?
Well, I have 3 concrete suggestions. Point number 1, if you live in a village, right, where the houses are on fire, that's
Right.
what COVID-19 is. You know what you do? The first thing you do, you tell your neighbor, let's stop fighting each other. Let's put out the fire first. So US and China should say, let's press the pause button on our geopolitical contest. Let's work together to eliminate COVID-19 first. Kill it forever so that life can go back to normal. So that's the first sensible thing to do. The
Okay.
second thing to do, and this is something that President Joe Biden should do, he should say that Trump's trade war against China has failed. It has made the Chinese economy stronger, not weaker. So press also the pause button on the trade war, get rid of the sanctions, allow the global economy to bounce back so that the bottom 50% in America can enjoy a better life from a growing economy. That should be President Biden's priority, taking care of the bottom 50% in America, not the rich elites in New York City. They don't matter. Thirdly and finally, climate change is real. The clock is ticking, right? Many of the changes are irreversible. And frankly, if we as humanity destroy planet Earth, we are the stupidest species on planet Earth. And what you do, I mean, let's say you're out at sea and your boat is sinking, which is what's happening to planet Earth. Do you quarrel with the guy in the next cabin on the same boat, or do you say, "Hey, our boat is sinking. Let's come together"? So if the United States and China keep up their geopolitical contest while the climate change is going on, they're like 2 stupid people on a sinking ship arguing about who sunk the ship rather than trying to save the
Trying
ship.
to save it. So, well, listen, I want to get in a final question before we run out of time. And that is, I'm reminded of the time when the Soviet Union and America were having a very hard time coming to a nuclear control agreement. And everybody said that Mr. Reagan, was not the right person to do it. And I remember reading that in Switzerland, they both sent their advisors away, met in a room, the advisors were aghast, and came out with a handshake and an agreement. So I'm asking you whether it is time for Mr. Biden and President Xi Jinping to say, hey, we're going to meet in Bali or wherever it is, and come out with an agreement on these 3 points that you've just made. Do you think that should be the next step? Just cut the icing and move ahead for both country and the world. What do you think?
You're absolutely right. And they should, of course, meet in Singapore, which is the Switzerland of Asia. And Singapore is a friend of the United States of America. Singapore is a friend of China. And I can assure you that they will have a very good meeting in Singapore. And you're absolutely right. The one big lesson I learned in 33 years of diplomacy, that the only way you win, you get a solution, is by developing trust with your adversary or the person you're negotiating with. And George Shultz, as you know, a great Secretary of State who just passed
Indeed.
away
Indeed.
recently, said always that it's all about building up trust with each other. So a lot of the problems can be solved if President Xi and Joe Biden were allowed to meet privately with each other and talk to each other frankly. And fortunately, they know each other quite well. And I believe that if the American media is more open-minded about China, and if the American strategic establishment stop its groupthink on China and start thinking of creative, innovative solutions for US-China relations, then I think, frankly, the world will be a much better place, and the people of America and the people of China will also be better off if the two leaders can talk to each other face to face.
With which, Professor Mahbubani, I must tell you that we're running out of time. So, you're a sought after speaker around the world. And I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you so much for coming on Polaris-Live and giving us the wisdom that you have. And let me now tell our viewers, I'm afraid we've run out of time. And so I'd urge you to go to my website, kashmiri.com, where you will find a listing of the other speakers that we will have as guests on Polaris-Live. And I hope to see you again on Polaris-Live next week. And until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.